Hi, welcome back. My name is Dwight. This is the Change Your Life podcast. I'd like to welcome you to another episode. If you haven't done so already, you can hit that like button. You can subscribe, and by all means, share this with your friends. There's a link to the channel. I'm sorry, I can speak. I swear it. There's a link to the channel below if you'd like to check out some of my other podcasts. I'd be happy to have you do that. Today, we're going to talk on the Change Your Life podcast. We're going to talk about remembering those who have passed. One of the things I like to do is, for those of you, some of you may know, some of you have watched before, but I've experienced a lot of death in my life. Quite honestly, my father had committed suicide when I was young. I was 18 years old, and we had my son. My wife was pregnant with my daughter, and we had my son. We were on our way to a sonogram. We got into an accident, and my son passed that night, and we lost the baby 6 weeks later. It was very difficult, and a lot of what I talk about is grief and how to handle that grief, and what do you do with that? How do you honor the memory of people without letting it consume you? And I say this some, my wife and I have subsequently split since then, and we remain good friends. And it puts such a strain on top of other things. I mean, I had been addicted to heroin. The addiction, happened. It really took off after my son passed away, and he really was my life. I had been clean for a long time, and then things happened. And anyway. But she kind of defines herself by this still. And this happened. My son's the accident was 15 years ago, so it's quite a bit of time now. And I can't say that everything was fine out of the gate. As a matter of fact, it took a very long time. And I've talked about this before. I remember sitting and talking to a psychologist about like how long is this going to be? And he said, well. He says it's usually about 4 years, and this was like 6 or 7 years, into it. So I was already past the curve, if you will. But what I had to learn how to do was to not define myself by that. I'm no more the father of a dead child than I am the son of a suicide victim. I don't define myself in these terms, because I think that by doing that, and not that she does it, I can't say that, because she doesn't wear her heart on her sleeve, and when it gets the better of her, she really chooses to keep it very private. But nonetheless, it's become a defining moment, and it will always be that way. I wrote a book called Price Tags, and obviously I refer to her. It's a memoir, and it's a lot of it has to do with losing my children and the heroin addiction and all that stuff, and growing up in a chaotic family, and my father committing suicide and things like that. And she, in the book, wants to refer to as LM, and what LM is Luke's mom. It's just, our son, and but there came a point in my life where I had to come to a decision. I did something on. There's a podcast that you can take a look at, and it was on the difference when grief becomes self-pity, right? And that it's time to start moving on with your life. But you want to do these things in a way that you're not forgetting. Like, I never forget my son. I remember when he passed away, the night he passed. We were in a hospital. I live in Queens, New York, and we were in the hospital. It was, at the time, it was New York Hospital, Queens. Before that, it was Booth Memorial. I think now it's New York Presbyterian, whatever. We were in there, but they had to bring my son to New York Presbyterian in Manhattan. They had, to operate on him. He had internal bleeding and everything, and I was waiting, because like they said, it's not good. He had a 5% chance. They said, like, this is the only chance he had. So they were expecting him to pass. And we couldn't go with him, because in the accident I had, a lot of broken bones, broken ribs, collarbones, things like that. And his mom, my ex-wife, she had broken her back. She crushed her foot. So, obviously we couldn't go with him. Other family members went to the hospital. And I really felt like, you hear all these stories, right? Like, oh, somebody died, and their mother came to say goodbye or whatever. Like, I really felt that my son and I were very close, and I really felt like I would feel this. I would feel him leave, and I never did. And I came to find out later that the reason I never felt it is because he never really did leave. That my son lives on in my heart. He's always with me, no matter where I go or what I do. There's always a piece of me that has him with me. There's a great scene in a movie called The Rabbit Hole, which was a very good movie. If you've lost a child, it's a very good movie to watch, I think. So how do you remember that? I remember, oh boy, after it happened, I remember feeling bad about even laughing. I didn't want to enjoy myself. And then, I didn't, I wanted to remember everything, and it was so difficult. And I remember one of the things I had, like we had an open casket for him. And I thought that was the worst thing for a long time because it was the only image I had of my son. He died 3 weeks before his seventh birthday. And I for the longest time, I couldn't remember the trips to the Bronx Zoo. I couldn't remember the aquarium and all these other wonderful things that we did together. All I could remember was seeing him in that little casket, that tiny casket, and how horrible that was. And I started to forget. I wanted to remember every little thing, as I said, and I had the clothes. In fact, I have right here. That's the shirt I was wearing in the accident. It says "World's Greatest Dad," and they had to cut it off of me. And my mother-in-law, who's just a wonderful person, she sewed it together for me and put it in that shadow box a while later. But I had his clothes in a bag, and I remember opening that bag once just to smell it, just to smell his scent. And all of that began to fade. So how did I help him to live on? And we have pictures and we have things like that. But as I said, I remember his mannerisms. I remember who he was. I remember the happiness that he brought me. One of the reasons that I call the book Price Tags, right? The book that I'd written. It is this idea that you pay a price for everything, right? And I'm going to talk about this, and actually, it's another podcast. You pay a price for everything, and I had a friend ask me, if you had to do it all over again, given the pain and the grief that you've been through, would you? And I said, of course I would, because my son gave me something, and he lives on in me in a way that is really hard to describe. My son taught me lessons that I don't think that anyone else could have taught me. My son was a better person in the short time that he was here than I could have ever hoped to have been. He was compassionate and empathetic. He was a beautiful spirit, and he taught me a lot about that. And I tell you a story that we got robbed one time. We used to do day trips, and these are the things that he taught me. We were on this day trip and we went on the Circle Line, and it was long. It's like a 3-hour cruise around Manhattan, right? And we did that because we used to do this. His daycare was closed for 2 weeks a year, so we would do these day trips. I would take the 2 weeks off and hang out with him. And from there, we were going to the Intrepid, which is right next to it. If you know the west side of Manhattan, you know where I'm talking about. But so we were going to walk over there. I got bumped and I got robbed. It's in the book. It's well written, if I do say so myself. But anyway, it was a bump and run, So I got distracted by an attractive female over here, and somebody bumped me, and they stole the camera. And when we got to the Intrepid, I realized it was gone because like an idiot, I had it on my hip, like only rubes from Nebraska. No offense, Nebraska, but only rubes from Nebraska wear their camera on their hip like that, right? And man, I couldn't let it go. I just kept complaining and complaining and complaining. And Luke finally said he got tired of it. He's like, "You're ruining our day." He goes, "Dad," and he just looked at me. He said, "Dad," he says, "Can we get a new camera?" I said, "Yeah, but is this, I spent that's my." He said, "Did anybody get hurt?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, then why are you bitching about it?" And he was allowed to swear, but only in front of me, because I never understood the big deal about cursing anyway. That nobody could ever define the difference between shit and poop. They're both 4-letter words, right? But one is okay and one isn't. I don't understand. But he said, "Well, why are you bitching about it? Like, we're here to have a good time, and I was killing his buzz, man, like, and that was Luke, like it didn't make any sense. We were hanging out, we're having a good time, like, shut up about it." And it's instances like that, and it's doing things like that. And I'll tell you, it took a long time before I could watch. Like we videotaped everything. He was our only child. As I say, my wife was pregnant with my daughter, and we lost the baby 6 weeks after the accident. So we didn't get to know her. Her name would have been Gabrielle Marie. But him, it took a while to be able to watch the videos that we had. We videotaped his whole life pretty much, and I've been able to do that since. And I've been able to have those wonderful moments, and all of that was very painful at first. And what I learned was like that there's a Dr. Seuss saying, and I love it because it pertains to this. It says, "Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened." And I don't expect that feeling is going to happen to you right off the bat. It's not. Like there have to be something wrong with you. You have to be like a sociopath to just go from, oh, okay, well, he's dead, let's move on. It doesn't work that way. But there'll come a point in your grieving when you may cross that line, and you may want to start thinking about reveling in the life that was rather than the life that was lost. To understand how wonderful, and that's something that I can look at right now and say how blessed I was, like how thoroughly blessed. Like he was such a great kid, and I wasn't like at his age. And I tell you this, my son was almost 7, so I was 7 years old when I started smoking cigarettes. By 10 years old, I think I was 10 when I first started to try to quit smoking, right? Because I wanted to be Walt Frazier, which is another story in itself. And my mother was, such a wonderful woman that she was very quick to point out that I'd never be 6'4" and I would never be black. And so being Walt Frazier was probably out of the question. And which, anyway, that was my mom. She's gone. She's gone too. But I digress. To have this child in my life that I know that I could never be as good as. I was doing drugs at 11, 10 and 11 years old, drinking on a regular basis and doing drugs. And I looked at my son, and my son he was just this beautiful light in my life. He was just wonderful for me. I loved that child, and everybody that came in contact with him, he was just a good kid. He didn't understand strife. He didn't understand. We used to watch Maury, which used to upset my ex-wife to know, why are you watching that trash with him? And I'd tell her, well, usually to watch, white trash like this, I'd have to go to a family reunion, and I don't do that. But, I used to watch it with him, and he only watched it because I watched it, And I remember him saying one time, he turned to me, and it was like the proudest day of my life. And we're watching this, you are not the father, and all that stuff. And one of them, this kid, he says, and Maury says, you are the father. And the guy just goes nuts. And my son turned to me and he said, why don't they want to be dads? He said, you love me and you love being my father. He said, I don't understand. And he didn't. He's like, why don't they want to be dads? Like, you think it's so great. You tell me all the time how wonderful it is to be my dad. And that to me was the moment, like that was it. And that lives on in my heart, that understanding that my son, in the time that he was here, and this is how I remember him as well, and it didn't take losing him to understand how wonderful he was. His mother and I, and she's a great mom. She may have been a questionable wife, but she was a great mother. And we had a love for that child that was second to none. And that was one thing that we were both able to do. And even when we weren't getting along great, was to make him first and foremost in our lives and to let him know every step of the way how loved he was. And now today, 15 years after his passing, he still lives on in my heart. And that love is still there. Like the love that I had for him then is still present today. And that's how he lives on. It's not going to be through other things. Things change, people change, the neighborhoods change, like things change. But that love remains, and knowing him and feeling him and feeling his presence will forever be with me. And that is how I remember him. And that, I think, is well to do for any loved one. I remember my dad, he died when I was 18, and he and I had a very tumultuous relationship. But there were very good things about it. And I try to dwell on those things, to remember those good things and the good traits and the good qualities that I learned from my father. My father was a very difficult man. He was a compulsive gambler. He was a drinker. He was all these things, very angry man. But there was a certain love to my dad that he showed me. And he would tell me, he would let me feel that he loved me. And that lives on. And that love is what I hold on to with all the people that have passed in my life. And I hope you got something out of that. I hope that that brings you some measure of peace in your life. I'm also a big believer in prayer. I'm a big believer in meditation, and to it helps me with these things. And it also helps me get into a headspace that allows me to remember all of these people in my life very fondly. My name is Dwight. I wish you well. I thank you for listening today. Again, you can like, subscribe, and by all means, if nothing else, share it with your friends. If you got something out of it, please share it. And if you know somebody who's suffering with the loss and grief of a loved one, share it with them. Maybe it'll help. I hope. Anyway, be well, and thank you. Thank you for listening. Bye.